Now, the Chancellor's autumn statement didn't just deal with cuts to public spending and a gloomy outlook for the economy. George Osborne also announced new tax incentives for shale gas and also the creation of a single office for unconventional gas. Effectively, he's firing the starting gun on a new dash for gas in a controversial generation strategy, which his critics say will lock Britain into a high carbon future. The Chancellor argues it will slash fuel costs for British households the way shale and other unconventional gas supply has done in America, and critically secure our energy supply. Some sites in Scotland have been earmarked for coal bed methane extraction, one at Lethen Moss, which opponents say could involve wells stretching from Stirling to Linlithgow and into Fife. Maria Montanaro is a local community councillor and campaigner against these developments. She says there's been too little public consultation with the company involved, Dart Energy.
The consultees in terms of community councils were 18 community councils in Falkirk. Only 3 were consulted. Because this is at the moment a very small scale operation, just 14 wells are being applied for. So the 3 community councils adjacent to this area were consulted. None of the others. Yet we are all, well, the whole central belt is sitting on coal. We are all in the future likely to have this industry on our back doors. And there hasn't been the proper consultation. 240,000 people and only 43 attend 5 exhibitions? No, that's not right.
What would be the effect, though, do you think, if this were to take off extensively in the area?
The licence area we're talking about now is 330 kilometres square. That's a huge area. This is just a small area at Airth. That is one licence area. Dart Energy have another 4 licence areas, and in the new year there's going to be a new round of licence areas up for grabs, and that's the whole of the central region. We are looking at a gas field for the central region, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wells, if the industry has its way.
What other infrastructure would be needed, do you think, and what would the impact be?
The road network. We cannot sustain the level of transport needed for this industry. We cannot sustain it. The other problem is the industries that we are trying to encourage at the moment. Tourism is a big industry it's a sustainable industry for Scotland. And yet this sort of development would be counter to that. It's incompatible. We are concerned as communities, although Dart Energy have given us their assurances that there will be no fracking in the area. We're concerned because there's a far greater reserve of shale in the area than coal bed methane. And for shale, you do need to frack. There is no other option. You do need to frack. So despite their assurances, we are very, very concerned, and they still haven't answered. We have asked them questions, and we've actually today, through our Member of Scottish Parliament, Angus MacDonald, given them 112 questions we'd like answered, and one of them is this. They're giving us the assurance, but what about the shale? And what about coal bed methane? Over the first few years, the actual production will fall off, and then you need to frack to increase the production again. So we're very, very concerned about that. But finally, I just want to say that in Shielding in California, our objection letter, we called for a moratorium on coal bed methane extraction. What we believe now is that the only sensible option is an outright ban on the entire unconventional gas industry, and the evidence is coming out from Australia, Canada and the USA, where they are suffering the consequences, health and environmental consequences of this industry. And we depend on our leaders, whether they're in Holyrood or Westminster, we're depending on their sound judgment to protect us from this industry.
Well, we have a statement from Dart Energy which says the company's existing and future plans are focused on developing its coal bed methane operation in Scotland. It says they're in daily communication with representatives from local communities, individuals, residents' associations and businesses to help people understand the plans. The company says our planning application makes it clear our water-based drilling fluids contain only safe, non-toxic, biodegradable additives, the same type of water-based biodegradable fuels used in conventional wells throughout the UK. Concerns have been raised over hydraulic fracture stimulation. This is the so-called fracking approach. But we do not use this technique, and our wells are designed in a way that means it cannot be fracked in the future. Well, joining us now, Ed Pybus, who's campaigning against unconventional gas development in Scotland, and David Hunter, who's an analyst at M&C Energy Group. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
David, is this purely an economic argument?
Well, I think there's this strong economic argument for looking at this, but of course the environmental consideration needs to be key here. If we look at what has happened to the States, though, it's really been an economic game changer. It's giving that country cheap gas, cheap energy. It's making it almost self-sufficient, and they're now talking about bringing manufacturing back from countries like China, because it's more cost-effective to do it in the US. Where we are economically, we absolutely need to consider this while assessing the risks very carefully and regulating them as tightly as we possibly can.
Ed, do you accept that there is an obvious economic advantage here?
No, I don't. I mean, firstly, there are huge environmental concerns, but also the economics don't really make sense. David said that it was a game changer in the United States, but the UK Energy and Climate Change Committee state that despite there is shale gas in the UK, it is unlikely to be a game changer in the UK because there isn't the supply here as there is in America. Also, I've got a report here from Deutsche Bank that shows that due to various constraints in the UK, including higher environmental regulations in Europe, the cost of producing shale or coal bed methane gas in the UK is going to be substantially higher than it is in the US. So in the US at the moment, they can produce for under $5 a unit in the coal bed, the shale gas. The projection for UK is about 8. In Ireland, the company that's developing in Ireland, their business plan relies on $11. These are way higher than the price of gas in America. So the gas prices in UK are not going to fall because of shale gas. What will happen if the price of energy does fall in the UK, then the shale gas becomes unviable here. So the only reason that drilling is happening for shale gas and coal bed methane in the UK is because of high energy prices.
OK, David, before we look at the Environmental Act, do you just want to look at that economic question? Particularly, we know that because the cost of coal has gone through the floor because of the gas price going down. Do you think that Ed's right in this equation, that actually it will become inviable if the cost of conventional gas goes down?
Well, it's interesting you raise that point. The cheap US gas prices are locked in the US and we don't have the benefit of them elsewhere, precisely for the reason that the shale's being used domestically. But also, if you look at the shale story in America a few years ago, it was a very, very different economic argument to what it has become, and I think it's unwise to write it off at this early stage.
But at the moment...
well, to be fair, if you look at even just the Cumbrian, the Bowland basin, it's thought that the British Geological Survey are going to say that has a capacity something like 17 times what remains in the North Sea in terms of gas. So I think very early on it's disingenuous to write it off.
Ed?
Well, one of the problems in America that the shale gas companies are facing is massive losses due to the low price of gas. So there's billions of dollars are being written off by companies that have invested in the shale gas in America. The other reason is that in America, in order to get shale gas and coal bed methane off the ground, it involved the tearing up of loads of environmental regulations, such as the Clean Air Act and things like this. It's well documented, but there's exemptions for shale gas in America to so that the industry could go ahead cheaply, because if there's regulation, you can't afford it. And the disturbing thing in the gas generation strategy, when they're talking about this new body that will oversee the whole thing, one of the lines in here that scares me is it will ensure a simplified and streamlined regulatory process. Now that sounds to me like you could bill that as cutting red tape, or you could look at that as cutting environmental regulations so that it can be drilled cheaply here. But what we risk there is damage to the environment for the sake of a short-term financial gain for the investors in the energy sector, but no security of energy supply because it will only last for a short period of time. The British Geological Survey estimate there is about 150 billion cubic metres of shale gas available in the UK, and about 290 billion cubic metres of coal bed methane gas in the UK. That equates to 4 years' supply. So we have enough for 4 years. What happens then? If we invest in...
well, let's just actually talk to David about what happens then, because David, the argument here too is that this would allow us to secure the base load over a certain period of time, and it also secures supplies for us in a market that is increasingly volatile and unpredictable, basically. So, David, what do you think then are the sort of political arguments now which will be used to say we need to access this in terms of our gas supply security, the base load, and actually just cutting costs to households?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've made many of the relevant points. The point is, I'm not saying that environmental regulation should be fast-tracked or pushed to one side. I think it needs to be robust, and you know, Ed's right to raise concerns there, but at the same time, streamline doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be regulations or they'll be cast aside. If you look at the US, one of the side effects that people wouldn't expect of the shale gas boom is a 20-year low in carbon emissions in the US, and at the same time, at the moment, the UK is burning coal like there's no tomorrow. Gas, at least, can be seen as a transition fuel over the next few decades. So the fact that the shale gas may or may not be long term, it doesn't necessarily prove inconsistent with the argument of moving towards renewables. But
okay.
The reason there's been lower emissions in the US at a 20-year low is due to a slight slump in the world economy that people may have noticed. That has reduced production.
And a massive switch from coal to gas.
But the problem is,
we're almost out of time, Ed. I think it's really important. People would like to hear what you think are the environmental impacts of this, because there is a distinction between this coal bed methane extraction and fracking. What do you think is actually the environmental impact, and what do you think is a structural impact?
We first of all have to be clear about what we're talking about with coal bed methane. When they're extracting coal bed methane, they drill down into coal seams which are full of water and gas. They then release the gas, they pump out the water, which drops the pressure and releases the gas. Much like if you undo the top of a fizzy juice bottle, the gas is released. So there's 5 major concerns about that. One is the pollution of water. Billions of gallons of water are pumped out of the well that is full of dissolved contaminants, including heavy metal and arsenic and the like. That has to be disposed of, and the plans at the moment by Dart Energy are to pump this into the Forth. Also, there's well-documented cases of the contaminated water in the coal seam seeping out of the coal seam into groundwater supplies. There's also the damage to the countryside. As I think Maria mentioned, 300 wells will be drilled in the that's one licence area that Dart are now looking at, that runs from about Stirling through into Fife. So that's 300 wells and the accompanying infrastructure of roads and pipelines. There's falling water levels as the water's pumped out of the ground.
Right, so the water table's affected.
And there's air pollution as well, and the main problem with the air pollution is fugitive emissions from wellheads and from coal seams. And in a survey of sites in Queensland in Australia, 44% of the wellheads were leaking methane, and methane is a gas which is 70 times worse for climate change than carbon dioxide. And obviously the main argument is climate change.
Right.
If we take gas out and burn it, we're putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And when you take into account fugitive emissions, research shows that it's at least as bad as coal, and in some cases twice as bad as coal, because the fugitive emissions that have escaped aren't measured. So when David says that US carbon dioxide may have decreased, which is partly due to the slump in the economy, they're not measuring the methane that escapes from the wells, which causes 70 times more warming than the carbon that's burnt.
Ed, I just want to... We really are almost out of time, Ed, and just very briefly, if you don't mind, do you think a lot of this is going by for people under the radar, Ed?
Totally.
Do you think
people are not aware of it. As Maria said, there was a Dart Energy on their website make a big thing of their public consultation they did in the Falkirk area to let people know about it. 43 people went to that exhibition. In a meeting held in one community that will be affected by one of the wells, 250 people turned up when it was publicised by local residents. 250 people turned up to discuss this with Dart Energy once they found out about it. So and that's David, why I'm here. I'm here, and that's why we're doing this campaign, to let people know that this is happening. And if you go to our website, which is frackoffscotland.org.uk, you can see a map, and that shows the licensed areas that have currently been licensed, and it stretches right across the Central Belt and into Dumfries and Galloway. Okay,
well, people, as you say, can go to that website. I'm really sorry, but we are almost out of time. David, do you think this is the point, though, that a lot of this is happening and people don't know yet about all the counter-arguments, that it does seem to be a bit below the radar, and that will change very rapidly?
Yeah, I think so, and I don't disagree with the environmental concerns, and they shouldn't be looked at, they shouldn't be raised. I think that's very important that we do it and that the regulation is robust, but we're in a situation where we can't afford our energy as it is. I think we have to be realistic about people want to heat their homes. They also want to work in manufacturing and have jobs in a future economy.
Investment in unconventional gas.
You've had more than your say, Ed.
Renewables.
I think you've had
do you know what
you
can check out the campaign against unconventional gas at their website, and you can also get all the arguments for it. But for us, we're out of time on that one. 9:37 now. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Did he say Frack Off Scotland?
I think he did.
I think he did. I'll have to look at that. Well, the headlines this morning. The head of the Australian